Hi guys, the title of the title you see on the screen today. Don't forget to like and subscribe and we'll get started.
This story will tell about the same girl who was the villain from the novel, and her name was Kayana Hill. As soon as she woke up in her new body and image, she could not believe that life in that reality was her second life. And this means that the reason why her gaze caught on the villainous Kayana was precisely because of her past life. Then she began to realize very well that since everything had happened this way, it meant that she had died in some way. The girl didn't know how it happened, and in fact, she didn't really try to find out, because she understood that it could upset her very much. In itself, same business, she was killed. As soon as Kayana woke up, a maid immediately came into her room and said that she was very glad to see her finally conscious. The maid brought a bowl of water and said that her face had become very haggard because of the poison. Therefore, to her better a little freshen up. She also added that her outfit would be ready very soon, so she better get ready to go out as soon as possible. As soon as Kayana heard this, she was very surprised and could not understand what kind of poison they were talking about. But at that moment, memories from the previous owner of this body suddenly began to appear in her mind, namely, that she was at some event and drank wine that was poisoned. After this, the poor thing became very ill. She fainted and did not wake up for several days. Kayana couldn't believe that these were all her character's memories, because they came flooding back to her so quickly that she couldn't even analyze them properly. But when the girl remembered everything, it became easier for her to understand everything. During the banquet, she drank a glass, after which she began to cough up blood, and, to her great regret, the girl moved into this body at this very time. Because of this, she was not very well. She felt some kind of great heaviness in her head and throughout her body because of the poison. When the maid saw that the girl was holding her head, she immediately asked if she should call a doctor because her complexion was unhealthy. But Kayana immediately replied that she was fine and there was no need to worry, and simply asked her to leave, and that was it. The maid replied that she understood everything, but she herself did not understand why the girl was behaving rather strangely. Normally, she would have already made a scandal, but now she was rather calm. The girl understood that something had changed, but she didn't know what exactly. And some time had passed since then. A new maid came to Kayana's room to help her get ready. She combed her hair while the girl just sat and thought about what to do next. Kayana didn't understand how she could be forced to preen so quickly, because she thought that she needed to recover from the effects of the poisoning a little. Therefore, such behavior from the servants was simply funny to her. However, she understood that she could not count on anything else. After all, this is exactly the life of a princess, and she cannot object to it in any way. Her life consisted of her having to do everything in the name of beauty in order to receive compliments from men at various events and be the best. Kayana was always surrounded by attention. Men said that there was no person in the world whose beauty surpassed hers, and they always simply idolized the princess. They always complimented the girl a lot. However, these compliments always concerned only her appearance. They never told her that she was very smart, witty, or funny. At that moment, Kayana suddenly laughed very loudly. The maid immediately became a little wary and turning to her asked, "Is everything okay?" But the girl ignored her. In fact, she couldn't even imagine that such a situation could happen to her. She still found it hard to believe what had happened. But of course, she was quite happy that she was reborn at a time when it was not too late. After all, young woman wonderful knew plot this stories. The father, the emperor, was still alive. In other words, the only thing that held Resf back still existed. However, time was running out. It was very soon. Resf was to become emperor, and then events would not develop in the best way. And until that moment, Kayana must get as far away from this man as possible for the sake of her own well-being and life. The only thing she can do for this is to get married. Of course, it is better to become the wife of a man who will be very easy to control, not a madman like Viscount Quill. Then she thought about what kind of man she would like to see next to her, and realized that she would not mind if he was nice and careful, who would never limit her, but always only support and help. But first she needed a way to deceive Resf's eyes and ears and then escape. And so, when she had finally finished all her preparations, a maid came to her and said that His Highness the Prince asked to meet her. Kayana, hearing about this, was immediately happy, because this was it, what was supposed to happen according to the plot. So she told the maid to tell him that he could come in. The man who will become the Emperor of Eldime, the main supporting character of the novel, is her half-younger brother, Resf Hill. He is an immoral man who seized the imperial throne by killing his predecessor. And having such a handsome appearance and a good-natured, impeccable appearance, he possessed a truly heartless character. This boy grew up his entire childhood without receiving a drop of love from the late emperor, so it is not surprising that such a person became a tyrant in adulthood. It was a poor child who was starved for love and affection. As soon as the boy came inside, he immediately greeted his sister and asked if everything was okay with her. The girl, smiling, replied that everything was bearable with her, and also added that he should not worry about her well-being. Resf came closer to her, and of all those nearby said that since this was so, it was a great relief for him. He was very glad to hear this. In fact, up until this moment she had not noticed at all, but now she understands how hypocritical his attitude towards her is. Kayena smiled and said that she had made him worry for nothing, since he was incredibly busy, and she also hoped that he had not come to this place because he was forced to do so. The man pretended to be offended by these words and asked her not to say that. But in fact, he, just like the maid, noticed that she was different from her usual self. He would not have been surprised 10 times over to hear the question of when the criminal would be caught. And besides, her chattering mouth, which never stopped chattering, and her facial expression were completely different. He could not understand this girl and what had happened to her. But Resf, turning away, thought that it was probably all because she was sick. So he decided that there was no point in inventing something that wasn't there. He moved closer to the girl and, hugging her, thought that this is how it should be. Besides the fact that his sister is beautiful, she is an absolutely useless doll. In a quiet voice, he told the girl that she needed to be sure that he would catch the man who tried to poison her with his own hands and make him pay for it. After this, the brother looked his sister in the eye and said that this was precisely why she should not worry about it too much. But Cayenne smiled happily at that moment, because she understood that he really considered her a doll that he could use in the name of his crown. But that was absolutely not the case. She was now a completely different person, so he, of course, would not have expected such an indulgence from her. Resf, away from herself, told him to stop looking for the criminal. As soon as the guy heard this, he was genuinely surprised, because he definitely did not expect to hear this. He immediately started screaming and asked what she was talking about, since his sister almost died, and now she was saying that there was no need to look for the one who was guilty of this. However, Cayenne, smiling happily, said that everything was true. She almost died, and she thought that it was precisely because of him. The girl looked at him with an icy gaze and understood that it was he who had slipped her the poison, so there was no point in looking for some other culprit. Resf was silent for a while and then asked if she was saying these words because she was afraid of retribution. But then he replied that there was no need to worry, because he would do everything to ensure that something like this did not happen again. The girl was starting to get a little irritated by this, so she decided to talk to him directly and asked if it was true that he wanted to set someone up. She knew that there was a man who was overly obsessed with her and assumed that he had decided to execute the son of the consul, Killian, and destroy their entire race. And all this would be only because he was a vassal of the Duchy of Kidroy. The girl replied that this was a rather good choice, but rather stupid. In fact, according to the plot, Resf wanted to reduce the influence of the Kiroi family, which was an obstacle on his path to ascending the throne. And it was for this reason that he slipped poison to Killian and staged this whole spectacle, but his plan turned to dust. The girl told him that it was impossible to trace the poison back to its original location if it was purchased on the black market. Weak evidence would not do in that location. But the guy continued to insist on his own and said that there was evidence and it was obvious. It would all be over quickly and they just had to make it public, and then she would forget about all this, like a bad dream. He also suddenly asked, is she really behaving this way only because of Raphael Kedre? Cayenne, hearing this, was a little surprised. She knew that he was the princess's first and unrequited love, but that was a thing of the past, so she replied that this was not at all so. The girl also said that her maternal family from the county of Hamel has connections in the black market. In the childhood of Cyprus, they would never stand by and watch their vassals being destroyed. When it became known that the county of Hamel was actively involved in the black market, the entire line would go into decline. And Resf would then be suspected of falsifications, which would put him in a difficult position. She took her brother by the hand and said that if the Duchy of Kedroy found out about this, then the one who would suffer would be precisely him. And that is why the girl could not allow this. If the county disappeared, she would be in a difficult situation. So she asked him not to destroy this duchy, but to make it his support. As soon as the guy heard all this, he was incredibly shocked. He didn't expect that she could say such smart things. At that moment, he even had the feeling that there was an adult sitting in front of him, scolding a child for a bad joke. But then, suddenly Cayenne, smiling happily, said that she wanted to take the chance and make the daughter of a trustworthy family one of her root ones. She also added that she wanted to appoint a person with certain personal data that could not cause her any harm, and asked what he thought about Olivia Grace. Resf did not react well to this. He wondered, was she really talking about the very lady whom the duchy itself personally supported? The sister, smiling happily, said that everything was exactly so. It was her family after all. They could make them their vassals, but the guy didn't understand what she was thinking about at all, because usually she took any support from the Duchess with hostility. In fact, the main character of the original novel, and the woman Resf is supposed to fall in love with in the future, was Olivia, and this time was no exception. Resf would also want to possess her, and later would decide to kill the girl who chose Raphaela over him. The man sat silently for a while, then asked his sister if she would really be okay if they decided to do this. Cayenne replied that, of course, however, for some time she would not be able to act as she would be comfortable with, but she was still ready to take such a step. The guy looked at her in surprise, and could not understand if this was really the girl he had known all this time, because now she was completely different, and seeing her mysterious expression, he asked what she was even thinking about when she suggested such things. But Cayenne did not listen to him. At that moment she stood up and, suddenly bowing, kissed his hand and also called the man her king. The guy, seeing and hearing all this, was simply amazed. He immediately pulled his hand away from her and screamed loudly, shaking her by the shoulders. But the girl didn't care. She took his wrist again and kissed it, saying that she only had him. In fact, the girl said these words for a reason, because the original character said similar things all the time. Resf looked at her angrily for a moment, and then pulled his hand away and screamed, asking her to stop. He was absolutely beside himself with anger and assumed that his sister had gone crazy. He also didn't understand. Was the shock from the poison so strong that it had a side effect? Then he finally spoke to her and asked her what she was planning, but the girl made a surprised expression and asked, "Does he really not trust her?" She also said that she was genuinely curious as to whether he even considered her his sister, as she had been wondering about that quite a bit lately. Cayenne wondered what he was going to do when she was no longer useful to him. She also added that it was not at all difficult to imagine the position she was in. Of course, the ideal and safe way to get rid of unnecessary garbage is to give her as a spouse to a man who will be able to benefit him. Cayenne, hanging her head down, replied that if she was not killed by her crazy husband for some offense, it would have happened anyway. The girl, remembering the previous events, knew that if she was given to Killian as a wife again, she would meet her end in captivity and enduring all kinds of abuse. The girl began to come forward and said that she was perfectly aware of her situation. He himself also understood very well that he needed her. Resf realized that he shouldn't hide and asked with a smile on his face, what does she want in that case? In reality, she wanted to have the right to do whatever she wanted, the opportunity to follow the call of her own feelings and heart, the opportunity to be the mistress of her own life. So she simply said that she wanted freedom. But the men, hearing this, immediately laughed loudly and asked, is she really saying that she wants to give up the pleasure that wealth and fame give? But Cayenne persisted and asked him to allow her to marry the man of her own choosing. The guy, having calmed down a bit, asked, does she really mean Raphaela in that case? But young woman replied that this not so. Hearing this, he was genuinely surprised, but then replied that it didn't matter to him, because he was interested in something else. What could she offer him in return? At that moment, Cayenne suddenly felt that something was wrong with her. Her body was starting to go out of control, but she didn't know what to do. She knew perfectly well that she shouldn't lose consciousness right there. It was too early, so she tried to control herself. So with all the confidence in her voice she could muster, the girl said that she would make him emperor. Of course, this could have happened without her power. He would have inherited the imperial throne himself. However, what was exclusively his, he would be forced to share with others, especially with the Evans family, who had taken on the role of his strategist. Resf wondered in surprise. Could she really take on that role in that case? But the girl, sighing heavily, replied that, of course, she was not telling him to believe her right away, but that for his sake, he really needed time to think about it himself. She didn't even have time to finish this sentence, because then she felt too bad and couldn't hold back the pain any longer. The girl lost consciousness and fell straight into her brother's arms. Resf looked at her in surprise, and when he touched her body, he realized that she was literally burning all over. The man also knew that it would take a lot of effort for the body to reach such a state. So he shouted out to the maids and told them to call a doctor immediately. Cayenne reached out with her weakened hand to his face and said that he was a good boy. After this, she finally lost contact with this world and went into the world of dreams. After that, the guy went to his office and said that they needed to reopen the investigation into the attempted poisoning of Cayenne. He asked his assistant to select from among the ruined aristocrats those who would voluntarily go to the guillotine, and also those who needed money and were forced to support one of their relatives. The assistant immediately replied that everything would be done as soon as possible. Resf sighed heavily and asked that he also introduce the observers around the princess, and he also wanted to be informed of all her actions. He also told the assistant to find out more about Olivia Grace. The man was very surprised to hear all these tasks from the boss, because it was the first time he saw him in such a mood. However, he said that he understood everything, and added that in that case he would go and start carrying out these tasks. When the door closed, the guy finally exhaled. In fact, until now he thought that the girl was completely in his power. However, it turned out that Cayenne just played with him, but he quickly dismissed these thoughts because she couldn't be that smart. So he even assumed that the girl had some kind of advisor. He thought it might be someone from Hamel County, but quickly dismissed the idea because they had no reason to do so. In fact, at that time the heirs to the throne were Resf and Cayenne, and besides them, there was also Duke Yester, Hendrik. But the Hendrik family had a blood relationship with the mistress of the previous emperor, and direct kinship was not recognized in the temple. Therefore, such a person has no right of inheritance kinship, not was. In addition, in this family, an incurable disease was passed down from generation to generation, so this family was a cause for concern. But then one day, an aristocrat from the outskirts appeared, who stood at the head of an authoritative force called a gang of bandits. This was the adopted son of the Duke Esther Hendrik, and after that the situation changed. Having destroyed the reputation of the current emperor's mistress, Katrine Rinberg, he took her hostage. And by threatening the emperor, he forced him to recognize his family, from which the previous emperor's mistress was, as a direct relative of the imperial family, received in hands right on inheritance throne. And Resf, having only troops, was going to use Cayenne to be able to restrain this man. But everything had changed. There were no more empty eyes that sought only pleasure. Now there was an aura that was impossible to forget, and a look that chilled the soul. The girl had mesmerizing blue eyes that looked straight into his, and now he couldn't forget any of it. The guy didn't understand at all how he should act with Cayenne and what to do. He considered her a stupid and beautiful doll, but one that belonged to him. At that moment, one man was seized in the estate, who was loudly shouting that he had done this only because he loved her too much. One of the guards turned to his partner and asked if there really was such a man at the ball, and also said that this was unexpected. However, the chained man said that even death could not change his feelings for the princess. Some time had passed since then, and the girl began to feel better. The maid who was cleaning her up said that those responsible for the attempted poisoning had been arrested. She also said that it was the day of the execution and asked if she wanted to watch. But Cayenne said no, she was going to end it there. Of course, she was angry with her brother, because he did what she thought. Half a month had passed since then. She needed time to recover, but also, she had been sitting quietly for a long time. Resf's wariness. At that moment, rumors began to circulate among the aristocrats that he had caught the criminal incredibly quickly. And besides, he had done so, but they did not understand why they should not grant His Highness Resf the title of Crown Prince. Other aristocrats did not understand that the right to inherit the throne belonged only to His Highness the Prince, and they thought that it was impossible to decide this so rashly. Thus, Duke Henry's position became precarious due to Resf's activity. The people felt that they must prevent him from receiving the support he needed in any way. They thought they needed to make their eyes and ears focus elsewhere. Just at that time, articles about Cayenne were appearing in the gossip columns, and it was then that the influence of the Duke's authority, who had become too hasty in business, increased, and rumors of the princess's beauty spread like wildfire throughout the kingdom. A rose with poisonous thorns, a beauty that led straight to death. That's what they said about Cayenne. The maid, who had finally finished tidying up her hair, said that the aristocrats were already waiting for Her Highness's coming-of-age ceremony. She also said that she would be able to meet her fiancé very soon, and then asked, "Does Cayenne really like Sir Kitroy as her betrothed?" The girl replied that no one knew for sure, In fact, there were spies all around, so this answer would have reached Resf's ears. She also said that the Emperor Father would hardly be happy about this. So anyway, the choice should not be too difficult. The girl also said that if Sir Kitroy becomes the husband of the Emperor's daughter, then certain problems may arise in the power structure. The maid was very surprised at this moment because she did not think that Her Highness was capable of saying something like that. Although the conflicting relationship between the Emperor and the Duchy of Hydra was no secret, no one knew what led to their relationship being what it was at that time. In a similar situation, Her Highness Cayena found herself in love with the head of the Raphaela clan, which became a continuous headache for His Majesty the Emperor, according to the maid. So she turned to the lady and said that in any case, His Majesty thought that this matter was really important, and that is why he listened. But Cayena understood perfectly well that he was not caring about her at all, but was trying to humiliate the guy by reducing Kitriev. Putting in her place, the girl said that she did not know the intentions of her father emperor, and until now had only been stubborn in vain, so she didn't even know where to look from shame. As a princess, she couldn't behave properly, and at least now she needed to put in order what she had done before. Approaching her dressing room, she asked the maid to open the dress room for her. In fact, the ball in honor of Cayenne's coming-of-age ceremony was about to open very soon. All the preparations took quite a long time, so the necessary dresses were already completely finished. The compliments were subtle, natural, and direct, and perhaps they were the compliments that Cayenne liked the most, so she didn't object. When the aristocrats who were present there saw her in a new dress, they immediately began to shower her with various pleasant words and talk about how beautiful she was. The maid, who was standing to the side, noticed such a rather restrained reaction and was a little surprised. She didn't understand why the lady had no reaction to compliments, which she usually always liked. The girl noticed that the princess had completely changed after the poisoning attempt, and it seemed that there was no one but her who felt it. Everyone, of course, liked that Her Highness had become much calmer, but the maid thought that she had certainly not become simpler. At this moment, Cayenne looked back and saw a worried expression on the maid's face, who quickly looked away from her. This child's name was Bello, and she was quite bright and resourceful. Also, ambition was available her character. Among the many maids, she was the only one who was worth anything. Maids' palace princesses were located under by power Resf. The maid, in the hope that she would catch the eye of the prince of the empire himself, could turn her back at any moment, just to stand out. The girl thought about it and realized that she could give Bella a chance. Therefore, she should think carefully about whether she was suitable for her as a mistress. To live a life where no one would interfere, she needed to get as many people on her side as possible, be it power or property. Cayenne, the one who lived her entire life in a birdcage, had nothing of her own. She only lived as a puppet, unable to realize who really held the power in her hands. Even though the girl had been deluded for a while, thinking that it was all hers, she now knew that it was not so. Cayenne was well aware of everything that was happening. In order to continue living in an illusion, she was not going to remain in the position in which she came into this body. The girl also wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. She wanted to live the way she wanted to live, and she was ready to do a lot for that. Cayenne turned to the maid and asked her to prepare everything. She needed to go to an audience with His Majesty the Emperor, so she needed to be well prepared. Quite a lot of time passed from that moment, and now the girl was finally completely ready and went to the Emperor. The man, seeing her on the threshold, was truly surprised and said that since she came to him first, it must be something important, since she usually never did that. Cayenne curtsied and said that because of her, many unpleasant things had happened recently, and she only wanted to sincerely apologize for causing so much trouble to Father Emperor. She was wearing an incredibly elegant white dress with red gradients. Her hair was also neatly pulled back, and she had light makeup on. When Cayenne raised her head up, she looked him straight in the eyes and said that since he would take good care of the poisoning incident, the man should not worry at all. She herself understood that she could not under any circumstances allow him to suspect his brother. Her father considers her a pathetic, immature, and ignorant daughter. Naturally, in this situation, they are not very close and have a bad relationship with each other. The Emperor was a little surprised at this moment, but he knew perfectly well that Cayenne had poisoned Resf. It was quite obvious. The man said that if she really wanted to catch the real criminal, he could help her in this matter. Cayenne, at this point, took his hand and said that what had happened was a mere trifle. She thought it was better to leave everything as it was. All this time, she had been a very stupid daughter, and therefore she wanted to correct it as soon as possible. Smiling, she also said that Resf was still just a child, so she thought that it could even be considered cute. The emperor, hearing these words, was very surprised, because even though she knew whose hands this body was, she did not want to do anything, so he assumed that the rumors that spread throughout the estate about her having changed were indeed true. The man said that more than a ruler's child, these are appropriate innate habits, and he said that her behavior was commendable, so he even wanted to reward her. The man thought for a while and then said that there was very little time left until her coming-of-age ceremony, and it was time to find a betrothed for her. Cayenne, hearing these words, even shuddered with horror. The image of Raphael popped into her head as if out of habit, but there was nothing she could do about it. She knew that she was no match for him anyway. She just needed the power of the duchy. So lowering her head, she asked him if he had a son of the same clan in mind. As soon as the emperor heard this, he was very surprised, because she was so obsessed with Raphael. However, apparently everything equals ready go out, get married for another. Cayenne explained that she was a princess and could not be guided only by her feelings, but that her duty was to follow his will. The emperor was amazed. During this time, the girl suddenly became mature beyond her years and very wise. So, smiling, he said that she continued to surprise him, that the choice of a partner for a princess should be approached seriously, and he would think carefully about all the options. The girl immediately thanked His Majesty and said that in that case, she would go and not bother him. When evening came, the butler came to the emperor and brought him a cup of tea. The man turned to him and said that, apparently, time had done its job, and his daughter had finally come to her senses. She had changed so much, he didn't think it was even possible. Their pathetic Cayenne could cover for her brother reasonably, and didn't even show her emotions while doing so. And he absolutely did not expect that she herself would be able to raise the issue of marriage and look for a new partner for herself. Of course, the emperor found it hard to believe that she could change so quickly, but the thought flashed through his mind that she had even fallen out of love with Raphael. In fact, Raphael, the wise man, was quite a handsome man. He had black hair and scarlet eyes, which symbolized his belonging to the duchy. His fortitude and courage, instilled in him from an early age on the battlefield, easily won the hearts of noble women, including the heart of Kina. That same evening, the girl called him to her place. He bowed, immediately introduced himself, and said that he was very glad to meet her. She looked down on him and thought that in front of her stood a man who was adored by absolutely everyone, just like the previous version of her. She turned to the man in a cold voice and asked him to stand up, and also added that they really hadn't seen each other for a long time. As soon as the man heard her call him by his last name, he was very surprised, because he did not understand why she did not call him Rafa as usual. She asked, was he really here to see His Majesty? The man said that was exactly it. He was told that it was now time for His Majesty's afternoon nap, and was told to come a little later. The aristocrats around immediately began to whisper that the princess had just left His Majesty's bedroom, and also talked about how the emperor continued to ignore the duke. Cayenne, when she heard all this, really thought about it, and realized that the emperor had been deliberately avoiding him, and then suddenly she came out, and thus undermined the whole conspiracy a little. The girl also turned to Raphael and said that they were in front of His Majesty's bedchamber, so she asked him to speak a little more quietly. The man bowed low and said that he did not dare to disturb the rest of His Imperial Majesty. So he decided to come just another time, and also walked past the girl. As he began to move away, Cayenne suddenly turned to him and told Raphael that she knew what had brought him to the emperor. The man, hearing this, immediately became worried and looked at the girl in surprise. He could not believe that she knew why he needed this audience. The girl replied that she, of course, was not sure whether she could help him, but they had not seen each other for so long, and so she offered him some tea, since he had just arrived from a long journey. The boy, hearing about this, was very surprised, and he could not understand whether Cayenne knew that he wanted to avoid the pressure of his family regarding marriage. At that moment, the girl smiled and asked what he would say to that, since they had just been delivered some very good tea, and they could rest a little. As soon as the boy heard this, he immediately became wary, and did not understand how Cayenne could help him with this. In front of him now was not the princess he remembered. She was always bothering him to attract attention to herself. Now the girl was completely different, and it was as if he was communicating with a negotiator or even just an intriguer. The man did not understand how this was possible because he knew Cain very well, but now he believed that in front of him was a completely different person. He was especially alarmed by this meaningful look, as if she knew absolutely everything. For this reason, the man was very nervous around her, but he decided that it was worth listening to her, and perhaps then he would be able to understand what was wrong with her. So, smiling, he said that he would gladly accept this invitation, and bowing, he went after the girl. After some time, they came to the gazebo, and the girls who were nearby noticed through the glass doors that Duke Raphael had come to the princess's palace. In fact, this surprised them very much, but they knew that he was still just as stately and incredibly handsome. The girls also gossiped about how they hadn't seen the princess for a long time. The maid turned to her assistant and told her to quickly bring luxurious dresses and shoes, because the girl needed to be changed immediately. But Cayenne asked them to stop, because there was no need to dress up at all, so she just wanted something comfortable to bring her. Some time passed since then, and now in the gazebo the table was already set with hot fresh tea and various desserts for such important guests. Raphael sat quietly and waited for the girl to finally come. He was still thinking about this situation that happened to her and how she could change so quickly. And finally Cayenne came inside. The man seeing her was so surprised that he couldn't even hold back that stupid expression on his face. In fact, before she always expressed herself in such a way so that she could meet him and be incredibly beautiful, but this time she dressed quite simply, even in a homely way. Cayenne actually wore a very simple dress and even pulled her hair up. She asked the man for forgiveness for making him wait. The man didn't answer. He was so amazed that she wasn't flirting, wasn't letting herself go, and he didn't understand how she could look so beautiful and impressive in such a way. He quickly remembered his manners and, clenching his hand into a fist, said that there was nothing wrong with that, and also invited her to sit down at the table. He tried to convince himself that he didn't care at all about all this, that it didn't concern him in any way. Cayenne quickly walked over and sat down opposite him and said that in that case, she would like to talk about his wedding proposals. The guy immediately became wary and asked how she even knew that he was receiving marriage proposals, because of course, no one had the right to know about this. But the girl said that this was quite predictable, since he was the heir to the most influential military family, coming immediately after the imperial family. Smiling slightly, she said that apparently Sir Raphael was against the wedding for some reason, although this was only her guess, and she could not know for sure. She understood perfectly well that she couldn't tell anyone that she knew about mysophobia. Raphaela. In the original, only those closest to him knew about this fact. She also said that in order to gain a vassal's approval as the next duke, either the simplest thing was needed, marriage or proof of worthy skills. Cayenne asked if he had not come to obtain from His Majesty the right to military affairs and thereby testify to his abilities. Currently, Raphael's parents are in the process of divorcing Leo Francis Primac's long-standing affair with the duchy and Raphael's father. The mother, worried about this, decided that when her son grew up and inherited the title of duke, he would definitely follow in his father's footsteps and begin to lead a dissolute life. And it was from this moment that all the problems that one could imagine began. A rumor began that Raphael was not interested in the opposite sex, so his heir could not be expected. Of course, the vassals were immediately against this state of affairs and began to protest. In 23 years, he had never even touched a woman's hand. Of course, this seemed completely abnormal to those around him, but the truth was that it was because of his mysophobia, which was close to mental illness. He felt no affection or love for anyone. He was disgusted by any touch, and all this because of mental illness. The guy had a lot of problems because of it. Without knowing it, the mother was in a hurry to marry her son. Raphael wanted to achieve the title by proving his skills and escaping from a terrible marriage. And that is why the guy was left with an incredibly difficult choice and simply did not know how to act, because he did not want to contradict his mother, but he also could not tell his truth. Raphael was silent for a moment, then said that he was surprised that she knew about this, and he asked how she knew about all this. But without waiting for her answer, he immediately said that she was indeed right. However, he still could not meet with His Majesty. She replied that he didn't need to do that. She was going to help him solve this problem. The guy was very surprised and asked how she was going to do it, came to her and immediately asked if she had brought everything. The maid, bowing, said that this exactly so. Cayenne, meanwhile, poured him a cup of tea and said that it was quite strong, so she was going to add milk and sugar to it to bring out the flavor in a different way. The man looked at all this with suspicion. In fact, he had a look that said that he demanded some kind of explanation. Cayenne immediately explained that it was a special tea that she sometimes drank. It helps to satisfy her hunger when she has to skip meals due to a heavy workload. She also said that it tasted pretty good too, and handing him the cup, asked if he wanted to try it. Raphael, of course, a little cautiously, but still tried it. In fact, the princess always prepared gifts based only on her preferences, so this was nothing new at all. Milk and tea was a real wild thing for him. It was the first time he had heard or seen anything like that. He also hoped that he would be able to swallow it at all. However, as soon as this wonderful liquid entered his mouth, he was simply delighted. Cayenne, seeing his expression, immediately smiled and asked if he liked it. The man actually said that it was delicious, and the girl replied that she added it to her taste and was glad that he liked it too. He felt a little awkward about it, but he said he liked it so much that he would like to ask for more if it weren't rude of him. Cayenne, smiling, said that since he liked it so much, she would definitely give him the recipe before leaving. In the meantime, he could take more and not be shy. The man immediately thanked her and began to drink another portion of this delicious tea. He had some strange feeling. He didn't know if he had ever felt so good from a simple drink. Meanwhile, the maid brought them another bundle of paper, and Cain said that since they had already satisfied their hunger, and he certainly had not eaten anything yet because of his busyness, it was quite useful. Then in that case, she would like to discuss marriage candidates. The girl immediately smiled, because she had been waiting for this for quite a long time, and decided that after tea drinking, this was the right decision. Several hours had passed since then. Outside, the sun had already begun to set behind the horizon, and now they had finally finished their meeting. Raphael went out into the corridor to put on his cape and leave. And when he returned home, his mother met him right at the threshold. The woman looked at him with caution and said that he was a little late and she had already been waiting for him at home for quite a long time. Raphael looked at her with indignation and asked if she should not be in the western lands of the duchy now, and also asked what her at all led to the capital. The woman looked at him and replied that he still had the same cold tone and asked if he didn't even want to offer his mother a cup of tea. The guy sighed heavily and told the maids to serve her tea and something simple to snack on. But then he suddenly stopped one of the maids and told them to serve more strong tea and milk with sugar. The maid. A little I was surprised, however, said that all were made. His mother, when she heard this, immediately asked him since when he started to like anything with milk and especially tea. Of course, Raphael didn't want to justify himself to her, so he simply said that from that day on he liked it like that, so he didn't want any more questions like that. Mom, of course, was surprised, but she decided not to touch on this topic for now, because she knew that he was very closed now and would not answer. When they came to the guest room, Mom said that his household was in complete disarray because he had no wife and asked what people would say about this. Raphael could hardly contain his irritation because he never liked such conversations with his mother, but he wondered, was it really only because of this? The woman immediately admitted that this was exactly the case. She could no longer tolerate his indecision, so she brought him a list of suitable candidates for him. The first was Lady Dolores of Avon. She played the piano beautifully and was a very good embroiderer. But at that moment, Raphael immediately remembered Cain's words, who said that this girl faints at the sight of blood, so she will have a very difficult time in the role of the mistress of the military clan. Moreover, the county was at that time on the verge of bankruptcy due to debts, and Duke Henry would soon swallow it up. The next woman was Lady Rita of Bacon-Brooken. She, as a mistress, trained knights and would suit a military family. Regarding this girl, Cain said that she lacked the knowledge and wisdom to manage a large family. More that, she has already there is hereditary disease. And it was madness. Now everyone was whispering in the corners. However, soon everything would become known in secular circles, so it was not the best option. The last candidate his mother suggested to him was Lady Olivia of Viscounty Grace. Her house was supported by his family, so he knew her well. She insightful and judicious young woman. Cain had nothing bad to say about Olivia. She said she was a tough and beautiful girl, so there was no point in picking on her, and she thought they would be a great couple. Of course, the man believed that the princess was seeking benefits from his union with this lady, and Cain also said that she wanted him not to forget that it was she who had facilitated their meeting. The boy did not understand at all what was happening then, and also did not know what to answer his mother. He sat for some time and thought about what to do. Now that the boy had listened to his mother's words, he understood that the princess could not have agreed on this matter with her in advance, but he had the feeling as if he had been bewitched by something. Raphael understood that if he thought rationally, then his mother was indeed right. Managing the family alone would take too much effort. However, whispering love to someone, gently touching this person casually, this was simply impossible for him. He could not even imagine it because he immediately felt disgusted and sick. So Raffaello turned to his mother and asked, hadn't he already told her several times in a row that he was not going to get married? The woman was very angry about this and said that it was absurd, because marriage was necessary for their family. This was not a case where he could just say, I don't want to. There is responsibilities. The man looked at his mother and couldn't understand how she could have chosen such a good moment to talk about suitable brides. And why did she tell him all this anyway? Raffaello looked at his mother and then thought about the princess and realized that he definitely needed to meet her again to understand her motives and perhaps discuss the situation that had happened. At that very time, there was talk in the estate that one of the girls had brought new cookies to the meeting and bought rare tea leaves. Another one said that it was all very expensive, so she hesitated for a long time. However, now she can eat as much of it as she wants, and it was just wonderful. The girl laughed and asked what kind of poison it was that made Her Highness change so much that she now behaved like a completely different person. But they thought it was even great. After all, if you serve her half-heartedly, she hardly gets angry, and if you are guilty of something, she generously forgives you. For them, this was just comfortable. One of the girls laughed happily and said that this was indeed the case, which meant that they might even have to be grateful for this poison. Also, one of the people present said that Her Highness Kana is incredibly good-natured, and they like it. But then suddenly another woman who had recently arrived addressed Lydia Benjamin. She started yelling at her and said that she was chatting casually without even putting the princess in her bedroom. The woman said that she was her maid and did not understand how she dared to be so irresponsible and not fulfill her duties on time. At this point, Lydia sighed heavily and said that even Her Highness was not outraged about this, so she did not understand what business the other maid had with this. She also said that she was acting like this only because usually only Lydia had to grovel before the princess, but she was the ideal and adored lady of the respected Benjamin family. The girl found all this very humiliating, so she got fed up with it. She slammed her hand on the table and said that if you think about it, it was His Highness Resf who hired them, not Princess Kana. They also said that it seemed like things had changed a bit there recently, and so they thought it was pretty strange. The other maids immediately began to support Lydia and said that of course, Her Highness Kana was very nice to her. Hear why she nothing notices around myself. The girl was very surprised and could not believe that they were really telling her these words. However, Lydia said that in any case, the prince needed the support of their houses, so His Highness would definitely protect them. The others began to agree with her and said that everything was correct. He hired them to restrict Her Highness Kana, so they did not consider it necessary to carry out any order. They also said that in that case, it was enough for them to simply look good in the eyes of His Highness Resf, and what the princess thought of them was no longer important at all. Lydia began to approach Bella closer and said that it did not concern her at all, and she did not understand what all the fuss was about. The girl her just irritated. She called all her other girlfriends and said that they had better leave, because the atmosphere had completely deteriorated. Bella, of course, was very angry with these girls. She did not understand how one could be so stupid and stubborn. She immediately ran out of the room after a while and thought that she didn't want to be in the same boat with idiots like them, but she was very happy that she managed to come to her senses in time. Bella almost got into trouble, so she knew that she had to control herself in the future, because even if the princess had changed, she still did not forgive mistakes. In fact, all the maids who worked in the estate were aiming for Resf as their spouse. And this is obvious because he was the only prince of the empire. He has refined facial features, a soft smile, a sweet voice like honey. At all, even his only drawback, his character, does not seem like a flaw that is impossible to live with. Absolutely all the maids who were present in the palace were in love with him. However, it is a huge misconception that his ruthless and cold nature can be melted by love. Of course, this is not true at all, because if a person is like this, he will be like this forever. Of course, Bella understood that all this was nonsense, and one must always know one's place, and also not try to change people who do not want to do it themselves. She just wanted to be valuable to someone. She didn't care who acknowledged her, so Bella wasn't as obsessed with this person as all the other maids, and she was irritated by their lax behavior towards their duties. Kana was sitting in her room at the time, reading a book before going to sleep. She thought that it was not in Bella's nature to just look at Lydia and those maids, and that is why, on the very first occasion, she ran to Mrs. Kane and immediately praised her, saying that she was quite a smart girl. She also said that her wise decision to side with the strongest was what saved her this time, so she really admired her. The red-haired girl immediately bowed. Her name was Annie, and she thanked the princess for such nice words. In fact, the first thing Annie did was run to her highness and say that Lydia had said that day that she would not clean the princess's room. So Cain handed her a small bag of reward and said it was for her. Price her courage and determination. Of course, she immediately rejoiced and thanked her highness for this. Meanwhile, Cain thought about the impudent, arrogant, and wayward Lydia. The first time, in fact, this girl also behaved very rudely and reported to Resf about every move of the princess. But it didn't save her. Resf, whose love she tried so hard to win, simply executed her, so Cain was going to prevent this and come up with something so that it wouldn't happen again. She knew it would be better to escape from this hell as soon as possible, and also from stupid Lydia, while she could not leave at will, while she had not yet become a prisoner of this place, like Cain. In fact, the original begins with a mallow about the wedding of Olivia and Raphael. A spouse for Raphael is already being sought, so the meeting was only a matter of time. So Cain understood that in such a case, the first thing she needed to do was to bring Olivia closer to her in advance so that everything would go as it should. Olivia was from a house of loyal vassals, the Duchy of Kidroy. But if Resf, who was in a tense relationship with the Hydras, ordered Olivia to move into the palace, she would be completely alienated from their home. Cain couldn't let anything stop her and Raffaello's love affair from blossoming, so she believed that Olivia should move into the palace by order of the Emperor, not Resf. No matter how the Hydra race fought for supremacy against the Emperor's order, they definitely couldn't go. So she wrote a letter on his behalf and had already sealed it in an envelope. Then she turned to Annie, saying that she had a task for her. The maid immediately said that she could rely on her and that she would do everything. The princess asked the girl to take this letter to the Salon Marthe on the Rue Laurence. She needed to give it to one person, and it was very important. At that very moment, one of the maids ran into her room and asked the princess for forgiveness for the intrusion, but said that the matter was very urgent. The girl ran so fast that her breathing was now very uneven, but she said that His Highness Resf was completely furious. He started to destroy everything in the palace. There was complete chaos and no one knew what to do. How only Khan heard this is she was very surprised. As soon as she heard this, she was surprised and did not understand how this was possible. She immediately replied that she would immediately go to him to see what was happening with her own eyes. Resf, meanwhile, was really destroying everything in the palace. He broke a plate and called the girl a mongrel who doesn't know her place. And he was also very angry. He called everyone stupid idiots, saying that he had done a lot, and they betrayed him for just a couple of mines. The maids were very scared. They stood aside and shook with fear, and the guards also did not understand what was happening and what to do. The man continued to scream and said that this was a pathetic insect that was doing God knows what. He did not understand how anyone could do such a thing. Just go and betray him. The man did not understand how it could be said that because he was born from a mistress, he and Henry were almost indistinguishable. Resf did not know how one could say that Henry's adopted son and the emperor's illegitimate son were equal. For him, this was very impudent, and it crossed all boundaries. He shouted, saying that he was, in fact, a real member of the imperial family and not that lousy Henry, and no one had the right to say otherwise. So he said that he would kill them all as soon as he became emperor, because people like them did not deserve to live, in his opinion. Resf was indeed very harsh, but he was confident in his words. After a while, he calmed down a little, and suddenly heard the maids talking to someone through the half-open door. They were telling someone who was on the other side, "It's better to come in later. Now is not the best time for this." But Cain was very surprised at this moment. She didn't understand why everyone just watched as the prince's piece turned into this. She walked inside with a very confident step and asked, "What if Resf got hurt?" She was, of course, very unhappy with this behavior from everyone else. One of the man's assistants suddenly bowed and did not understand since when the princess was so cold-blooded. However, the brother suddenly turned to Cain and told her not to come closer. Voices sounded quite rude and very wicked. But the girl, of course, did not listen to him. She began to come closer to him because she wanted to talk. This angered him even more, and he, raising his voice, said that he asked her not to come closer. However, she suddenly put her hand on his cheek and said that if she did not come over, he would remain standing alone, so she did not want that. At that moment, the girl wiped the blood from his face from the scratch that appeared after he broke the plate. The man straightaway seemed surprised, asked what this she speaks. But Cain looked at him, and smiling happily, said that if she was not there, then he would continue to be alone, and she really did not want that, so she did it. When she wiped the blood, she noticed that the cut was quite deep and was very surprised. She also said that the mind could not comprehend how he got hurt and added that he must be in pain. The girl also asked how one could treat someone with such a beautiful face as his. She thought that his need to take care by all forces. At that moment, Resf suddenly took the girl by the waist and lifted her into his arms. Of course, I was surprised, because not expected such. He began to carry her out of the room and said that his sister always treated him like a little child, and also asked if it was true that he looked terribly stupid in this fit of his hatred. The man understood perfectly well that it was too emotional. Cain, smiling, said that there was nothing to worry about, and also asked if his soul had become at least a little calmer. He didn't respond to this, but only looked at her for a while, and also allowed the girl to wipe the blood from his face. Some time passed from that moment. They moved to another room, and the girl took with her a small first aid kit to treat his wound. Cain was bandaging his scratch, and he suddenly asked if she herself was hurt. But the girl answered that she was fine. He didn't need to worry. She also added that his wound saddened her much more than her own. His scratch was quite deep, and he was practically the face of their empire, and therefore she was very worried. Cain also said that it can last as long as he wants, but he must not put himself and his body in danger. She really hopes that this incident will give him at least a little understanding of this. The man turned away from her and asked for forgiveness for what had happened. He also said that he had learned something unpleasant, and because of this, he could not control his emotions. As soon as the girl heard this, she immediately realized that Henry had most likely lured his people away again. He hated being compared to Henry because of their blood ties, so he couldn't help but get angry. No matter how cruel Resf was, he was still a boy who had not even reached adulthood. He was still at the age where he needed the support and love of a guardian. However, the emperor was his only parent, and he hated him. So the boy only had his sister to support him. Cain understood this, and knew that this child still had a chance to change if she cared for him sincerely. So she fixed his hair and told him that he could not worry and trust her alone. She also looked him straight in the eye, smiled, and added that there would be many impatient people at his coming-of-age ceremony. And the emperor allowed her to choose a worthy groom on her own. So soon this news would reach the aristocrats. And she said that in that case, they would think that it would be enough to get hold of the stupid princess, and the imperial throne would be in their hands. However, alas, she will be unwell that day, so he, supposedly not suspecting anything, must warmly welcome the irritated guests and make friends with them. As soon as the boy heard this, he immediately realized that this way, he would be able to gain the support that Henry had taken away. This was a very good chance for him, but Cain was definitely up to something. Resf immediately turned to her in surprise and asked, "Is she really going to marry another man?" And he asked what same happened to Raphael. He also wondered, didn't she love him more than anyone else in the world? And now she was really ready to get rid of him just like that. The girl was silent for a while, then said that of course she wanted to get him. However, her feelings could change in the future, so it was quite natural. She explained to her brother that over time the understanding of love becomes blurred, and there are no feelings that cannot change. Therefore, it's natural that she has also this happened. Cain, smiling, explained that love is certainly no exception. It's like a favorite dish. You like it for a while, but then you don't enjoy it as much. At this point, rumors began to spread around the estate that Sir Kidroy had accepted the portraits of the marriage candidates. They wondered if Her Highness had said anything about it, because she liked him so much and she was really in love with Raphael. The girls also decided that apparently those rumors were true, and the princess's feelings for Raphael finally faded away. Already he picks up to yourself already new candidates. And in this case, the girls understood perfectly well that she had a chance to find someone else. They all disliked Olivia, and when they heard that her portrait had also been accepted by the House of Kidra, they were, of course, very surprised. When a rather large event took place at the estate, where many noble people gathered, one of the girls approached Olivia and asked, "Was she really uncomfortable in this place?" The girl immediately responded that this was not the case at all. She was extremely grateful for her invitation and really appreciated the attention that was given to her. In fact, Olivia understood that her family was rather ordinary, so she had never been to such receptions before. As soon as the rumor began that her portrait had been accepted by the Kidra family, invitations to such meetings immediately poured in from everywhere. The woman said a little more quietly that she had heard that fortune had smiled upon her, and that Lady Olivia was such a chance. She also said that she could imagine how happy the girl was to receive it. She also said that the princess usually tormented her like this, and if the wedding went well, it would be simple revenge. And the girl believed that Olivia needed to somehow feed the younger ones, who were starting to go hungry, and she, as the eldest daughter, needed to find the best match for marriage so that the family would be proud of her. The girl at that moment held back the emotions that these words had caused her, and laughing, said that she had never really thought about it. The girls immediately started whispering among themselves and did not understand what kind of reaction she had. People also felt very sorry because they thought that there would be a big scandal now because of what the aristocrat said. In fact, no one around had yet talked about Olivia being invited to take the position of maid in the princess's palace. And she thought that the princess would hardly want her presence next to her because she hardly knew how much she hated this girl. But in fact, this moment was chosen too well to be called a simple coincidence. Immediately after receiving a request from Resf to enter the princess's palace as a maid, Olivia received a request from the Kyra Duchy to send a marriage proposal. It was extremely timely, as if the princess had anticipated the upcoming rumors and sent this request immediately. However, the people of Olivia were under the control of the Duchy of Kedra, and if they continued to follow Resf's orders, the position of the Kedra clan would be precarious. Just one mistake, and an outside observer would decide that the Kedras were collaborating with the prince, so Olivia could not understand what exactly the catch was. A maid in the princess's palace is a very honorable position. It is incredibly difficult to obtain, so she knew that they could not simply pick her up warmly and offer this place practically for oil, thereby raising her social status. At that moment, Olivia left the main hall, where the whole event was taking place, in order to be alone for a while, and then suddenly a maid came to her. She handed the girl a letter and said that it was a message from her mistress. In fact, it was the princess's maid. Olivia, of course, was very surprised. She took the letter in her hands and noticed that it was sealed only with wax. There was no relief imprint. This meant that the sender wished to remain anonymous, and she asked the maid if she had any reason why she should read a letter from an unknown sender. The maid replied that the mistress's guess was correct. She told me to tell her the following. If she had any doubts, that was quite normal. After the maid had conveyed these words, Olivia nevertheless opened the letter, which said that she already had a lot of questions in connection with recent events, and this letter should at least a little to her help.